Good morning. How y'all doing? I'm using that southern how y'all doing, because it's so warm. How many of you survived the blizzard we had last night? Woke up, there was so much snow in the gutter on the street that I almost didn't make it in. Oh. How many of you want more snow? How many of you don't? I'm glad I'm not God. Some of you are praying, please don't let it snow, and the other half are praying, yes, please let it snow. And I want snow, folks. Last week we touched a little bit on Moses, and it was just a short portion, but I like to talk more a little bit about him today. I'd like us to understand who Moses was first. So let me give you just a short recap of who Moses is. He's found in the book of Exodus back in our Old Testament. And Moses was an Israelite. He was born a Jew, but it was during the time of slavery. They were enslaved to Egypt. And so every male child who was born was supposed to be put to death. And so when Moses was born, his mother was worried, and she put him in a basket and put him in this creek and just sent him down. Pharaoh's daughter found Moses as a baby and wanted to raise him. And so she took him with permission from her father to this Israelite woman who just so happened to be his mother, and she was unaware of that, to nurse him and take care of him until he was old enough to be taken to the palace of Pharaoh. And then that's where Moses grew up. He grew up in the palace of Pharaoh. He was a prince of Egypt. But he knew his heritage. He knew that he belonged to Israel. And when he saw a guard viciously punishing one of the Israelite slaves, he became angry. And he must have felt like God had called him, or something in him was causing him to want to deliver his people. So he stood up and he attacked the Egyptian guard and killed him. He thought it was done and no one knew it. But they did. And when it was found out, Moses ran for his life. He spent 40 years growing up in Egypt as a prince, and now he ran to the wilderness where he met a woman, he married the woman, and his job was to be a shepherd. His job every day was to take the sheep out, find grass and water for them, and then bring them back at night. Now I want you to understand the difference from prince to shepherd. Big difference. And finally, God called Moses, and he delivered Israel from the hands of Egypt. It's an amazing story. We're going to look a little bit deeper into it. Now, one thing that we need to understand is we don't know much about Moses' faith during his time when he grew up in Pharaoh's palace. We don't even know much about him when he wandered for 40 years in the desert with these sheep. We don't know much about his spiritual existence or what was going on. We do know that Moses most likely was discouraged and felt defeated. He was a fugitive. And his life was passing by. He was just leading the flock of his father-in-law's sheep in the wilderness. I don't know about you, but boy, that sounds like an ultimate life fail. Does it not to you? I would feel like a failure. From Pharaoh's palace to lowly shepherd in the wilderness. Most likely, like I said before, his primary concern was just to get the sheep grass and water, get them fed and get them something to drink and get them back safely at night. But something happened in Moses' life. He saw a bush, and this bush was on fire, but it was not being consumed. It was not being reduced to ashes. It just remained on fire. The flame was there. And I want you to see what happened. God saw that Moses had stopped to look. You see, when Moses saw this, he stopped what he was doing. He stopped looking for water. He stopped looking for grass. He stopped everything else. He stopped watching the sheep. He stopped and looked at this bush. And when he stopped to look, that is when God spoke. It says God called to him from out of the bush. Moses, Moses, God said. And Moses replied, yes, I'm right here. Moses stopped. And when he stopped, that is when God spoke to him. God did not explain to him how the fire was in the bush and it wasn't consuming or reducing the bush to ashes. God did not explain to him why for the past 400 years he had been silent and left the Israelites in slavery to Egypt. He did not explain himself at all. I know that every Israelite wanted to know where God had been for 400 years. But all God did was called out to Moses by name. After 400 years with no explanation, the silence was broken. The God who created the heavens and spoke into existence the universe began to speak to Moses. Then the Lord told him, I have certainly seen the oppression of my people in Egypt. I have heard their cries of distress because of their harsh slave drivers. Yes, I am aware of their suffering. Moses did not encounter God because he finally figured God out or because he finally found where God had been hiding. Moses encountered God because God came to where Moses was and called his name. Moses encountered God because God came to where Moses was. Not because Moses came to where God was. God is a searching God. He is searching for each and every one of us. And He comes to where we are. No matter what we're going through. In the same way, most people who find God today don't do so because of a philosophical inquiry, or most people find God in a moment where they are confronted by the simple fact that God is. They are going through life when suddenly God interrupts. For some, God does it like He did with Moses, through unsolved mysteries like the burning bush. He confronts us with things that we can't explain. He comes to us in what we're going through in life, and suddenly there He is in the day-to-day tasks we recognize Him. For some of us, it is a simple question that brings us to God. Where did we come from? Anthony Flew, one of the 20th century's most famous philosophers and advocate of atheism, stunned the philosophical world in 2004 by announcing that he had begun to believe in God. Flew said that he just didn't see any other compelling explanation for the complexities of design in creation. For years, he had tried to make peace with it, but it just couldn't be that nothing times nothing equals something this complex. It couldn't be that the wonderful, beautiful complexity of intelligence of life emerged from dead chaos. There had to be a God. For others, death prompts them to consider the possibility of something beyond the grave. Shortly before he died, Steve Jobs, the founding CEO of Apple, told an interviewer that he sometimes believed in God and sometimes didn't. But after he was diagnosed with cancer, he found himself wanting to believe. It can't be, he thought, that when we die, it all fades into black. All the wisdom we've accumulated as a human race, all our accomplishments, somehow must live on. In fact, he explained it this way. That's why I never like to put on-off switches on Apple devices. I didn't like the idea of being able just to flip a switch and turn something off. Can you believe that? In the same way, the experience of love and beauty are invitations to turn aside, to stop and listen. Remember when you first saw your spouse? I do. It was like, hubba, hubba. And she was sitting right next to the place where I normally sit and ate lunch as a police officer. Be still, my heart. Remember when you fell in love with your spouse? Do you remember those strong feelings of love? Let me tell you something. After 33 years of being together, my love for Lisa is greater today than when we first got married. So how do we explain love and beauty? C.S. Lewis said that through beauty, he experienced a yearning that compelled him to earnestly search for its source. He concluded in his book, Mere Christianity, a baby feels hunger. Well, there's such a thing as food. A duckling wants to swim. Well, there's such a thing as water. Men feel sexual desire. Well, there's such a thing as sex. If I find myself a desire which no experience in this world can satisfy, the most probable explanation is that I was made for another world. If none of my earthly pleasures satisfy it, well, earthly pleasures were never meant to satisfy it, but only to arouse it, to suggest the real thing. The real thing is God. And I got to tell you, I find that much more compelling than Richard Dawkins' account for beauty. He is an atheist. This is his account. When you look at a certain scenery, you think it's beautiful because your ancestors believed that there was food out there, and that particular neurology makes us think it's beautiful. Wow. So, when you look at the stars and the sunset and see how beautiful it is, does it remind you of food? Yeah. Whew. I need a Milky Way bar. Just saying. Let me ask you this. Is your love toward your spouse, kids, or parents merely a conditioned response that enables you to propagate your DNA into society faster than your neighbors? That's what they tell us. I mean, I want you to think about this for a minute. I got this from Max Lucado. Thought it was really cool, okay? He said, try putting that on your Valentine's Day card. Are you ready for this? Listen carefully. Honey, on this very special day, my genes are releasing chemical compounds into my bloodstream because they have been cultivated through centuries of evolution to see you as particularly useful for the propagation of my DNA into the next generation. Cecil. Woo! Oh, honey, I love you too. I already got her card. I didn't write that in there, okay? Okay. Love and beauty can only be explained by the existence of God Himself. Perhaps pain or disappointment has driven you to look for answers. I remember when I was in college, Lisa and I were there, and there were so many things that I was doing. I was going to school full-time. I was working full-time. Lisa and I sang in the college's PR group. I was playing in intramural basketball, and I was trying to keep our marriage and family life together on top of all that. And attend church and everything else that you have to do. Well, I was playing basketball, and I had stolen the ball, and I was going for a layup with the stolen ball, and I was going to be the hero, and you know how that goes, right? And I went to jump, and I didn't jump. I just crumpled to the ground. And when I tried to get up, I couldn't get up. And so they called Lisa, and they carried me out to the car, and Lisa took me to the hospital to get checked out. I had herniated 2 discs in my back. And it laid me flat on my back. If I had to go to the bathroom and she wasn't around, I had to crawl on all fours to go to the bathroom because I could not walk. And I was feeling pretty sorry for myself. I couldn't attend classes. I couldn't go to church. I couldn't play basketball. I couldn't go sing in the PR group. I couldn't do anything. I was flat on my back. And it was me laying there, feeling sorry for myself, asking myself why God was punishing me. It was Sunday morning, and evangelist David Ring was on TV. David Ring has cerebral palsy. And if you ever hear him preach, you have to listen very carefully because his speech is so slurred. But I was listening very carefully to him preach. And I was still feeling sorry for myself. And And I was kind of angry at God that He would do this to me. And then David Ring looks right into the camera, looking straight at me, and he says this: I have cerebral palsy. What's your problem? And it was like God just came in. It was my burning bush experience. I stopped to look. God was not punishing me. I had become too busy to spend time with God. He wasn't punishing me, He was rescuing me. God was trying to get me to see the importance of slowing down and making sure that He was part of my life. Oh, I know I was going to school to be a pastor. I was studying His Word all the time because I had to take tests. I was even memorizing it. But I had pushed God Himself out of my life in all of it. I believe that God put me flat on my back so I would finally look in the right direction, so that I would hear the voice calling from the burning bush, Cecil, Cecil. C.S. Lewis said, called pain, God's megaphone to rouse a deaf world. He said, God whispers to us in our pleasures. He speaks to us in our conscience, but He shouts in our pains. Folks, sometimes God uses pain and disappointment as a burning bush in our lives to get us to stop and look in the right direction to God. Many people spend their whole lives climbing the ladder of success, only to find about getting to the top, there's only emptiness. And they feel like there's got to be more, and they look how to climb another ladder. Many people find that the thing they've worked so hard for just didn't deliver what it promised. Let me tell you, folks, that's because false God, success, sexual pleasure, power, fame, or even family always disappoints. The disillusionment on the other side of a fulfilled dream is an invitation to stop, look, and listen for God's voice. One of the most effective evangelists I've ever known in my lifetime was my dad's brother, my Uncle Laverne. He was lying in a hospital room with cancer. The doctors had told him that there was nothing more that they could do for him, and that he had just a few days to a couple of weeks to live. Now, his story may seem tragic, but that's not the way he looked at it. He told the doctors and nurses on his floor, or anyone else he could find to listen, about Jesus and His love. He led doctors and nurses into relationships with Jesus. His life was a burning bush that drew people to Jesus. My Uncle Laverne became the burning bush that helped people stop and look and listen. I talked with him just days before he died. And I asked him, called my grandmother Oma, that's German for grandma. I said, can you tell Oma and Opa Can you tell them, hi from me when you get to heaven? There was no sadness in his voice. I've never heard so much cheer in my life when he said this: I've got something better. Will be waiting for you at the pearly gates of heaven when you walk through. In life, he was a very talented musician. He played the drums, sang in bars, got drunk, had affairs on his wife. But when faced with death, he became a burning bush that caused people to stop, to look, and listen for God's voice. Let me ask you this. Are you encountering one of these burning bushes today in your life? Have you stopped to listen? Let me ask you, are you a burning bush? At work, at home, at play, wherever you go. Bow your heads and close your eyes. I want you to stop and think for a moment. Is God speaking to you through a burning bush experience? If He is, release yourself to Him right now. What are you going through? The pain, the disappointment, the discouragement? Tell me. What is a burning bush in your life right now? Now I want to ask you with your heads bowed and your eyes closed, if you're experiencing a burning bush type event in your life right now, and you'd like me to pray for you this week, just lift your hand up and put it back down. I won't approach you. I'll just pray for you this week by name. Thank you for that hand. Thank you for that hand. Anyone else with an uplifted hand? Thank you for that hand. Anyone else? Let me say this. If you are not experiencing a burning bush, if you've already experienced that in your life, then why not ask God to help you become a burning bush in somebody else's life?